ever since COVID started, companies were pretty much used to people working remotely from wherever. So when people started leaving Russia, companies actually adjusted to that.
So what were some of the most memorable and most exciting experiences that maybe you say, I'll never forget that, this made it all worth it?
The exposure you get to a different culture, to people. You may be reading up a little bit about the history, well, culture. Mostly I remember food.
Nice.
We're not digital nomads in like the most proper sense of the word, but we still traveled a lot and lived in multiple countries. So can you tell me more about your experience being a global citizen?
So I started, or for me, the phase or moment started in 2018. I was leaving a job in Hamburg where I worked in a hotel and had a regular day job, I would say. But I had this idea that I wanted to sail around Europe for quite a while. I love sailing since I was a teenager. And then in 2018, end of 2018, I made that decision and made that call that I'd just go buy a boat. And to meet a few digital nomads first, I went to Thailand because I heard that's the spot to be. And I lived in Chiang Mai for 3 months, which was really interesting and actually really, really cool. Not just because of the people I met and the experiences and the life and business lessons I guess I learned in that time, but also because of the culture in Thailand and really the nature is so vastly different than what I was used to from Central Europe. So I think that was really cool. But then in May, I bought a boat in Sweden. And the plan was initially to buy a boat in Finland and sail it all the way around Europe to Greece, which I didn't end up quite doing, but I sailed it to Italy, which was fair enough, good enough for me. Right. And that was my life on the boat for about 6 months.
How many countries did you go to while you were living in the boat?
I think 12.
Nice.
Yeah, basically all the countries that have a European coast I've seen.
Yeah.
Or mainland European. Yeah.
Very cool. So how was it, like, how much is it different living in the boat rather than going to a day job, waking up in your own bed, taking a subway or something to work?
Well, I had my bed with me, right? So it stayed in my own bed as opposed to go traveling from hotel to hotel. So that was fine-ish. But of course, you're way more immersed in nature and just get the full experience. Also because it was a relatively small boat. It was around 7.5 meters. So yeah, you're more immersed to the elements than you would be when you're living in an actual steady house that doesn't wiggle when you stand on one side versus the other side of the room.
Right.
But I knew that before, and even after 6 months on board, I didn't start hating it. So I guess I loved it.
Would you repeat it?
Not immediately, but at some point, yes. I've planned to travel across or sail across the Atlantic next year. So not going to take 6 months, but roughly 1 month maybe.
Wow. Wow, that's very ambitious and cool. Looking forward to hearing all the stories.
Yes.
And can you tell me how you supported yourself while being on a trip like that? Did you have a remote job or?
Somewhat, yes. So a friend of mine had a business and I worked as a salesperson basically for him from just my laptop and my phone basically. Yeah. And I did that a couple of hours every day. My times were very flexible because I was working with people all over the world. And then sometimes I would work rather in the morning and then sail in the afternoon or vice versa. So that was pretty cool to experience it like that.
Right.
Yeah. I heard you lived in Thailand as well. But before you lived there, I think you also lived in different countries before. Tell me a little bit about where did you live, but also really curious about why you decided in the first place to leave your hometown, home country that you were born in.
Yeah. Well, my story is originally from Russia. Ever since I was, I think 16, I would spend every summer in Berlin. I would usually like rent a room with a local and then attend like a language school in the city and basically just party the rest of the time. And then several years later, I got into an American school, so I spent a few years in the States studying and working after that, and then moved back to Moscow for a while. But of course, as for a lot of people, last year was life changing for a lot of um, people that were affected by the war in Ukraine, and for us, it was a turning point. The war started when I was in Thailand, actually. So I went there with my son and my mom, and I was in between jobs. So I was supposed to start a new job while I was in Thailand, and basically when the war started, it was like this life changing moment where when we decided with my husband to leave and start a new life someplace else. So right after Thailand, we went to Istanbul. I continued to work remotely from there, and then we moved here to Amsterdam.
Okay. And what were the jobs that you were doing? Because you mentioned you were in between jobs, and then I think there was a later job change as well.
I was working remotely for an IT company, a Russian company.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was like shocking and unorthodox situation for the whole IT sector. But I mean, ever since COVID started, companies were pretty much used to people working remotely from wherever. So when when people started leaving Russia, companies actually adjusted to that, and now this company they used to work for has offices in Istanbul, in Serbia, in Armenia, all of these countries that Russians went to after the war started.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, but we never really wanted to become digital nomads. On the contrary, we wanted to settle down and get a mortgage and make babies and all of that. But yeah, life is you can't really plan a lot of things in life sometimes.
I think a lot of people have that idea where they say, well, it just kind of happened and I never really had planned on it to end up this way, so to speak.
Exactly. But, yeah. And even now, I don't really want to plan anything. Just kind of live in the moment.
Are you getting the mortgage and the more settled lifestyle in Amsterdam now?
Not a mortgage yet. But yeah, I feel like at least the first several months were about adjusting once again in a new country and building this infrastructure around yourself, finding an apartment, figuring out public transport, figuring out where to buy groceries to not overspend, all your bills, like your local SIM card, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And then we also have a kid, so we need to find childcare for him. So it took time, also an adjustment to another market, a job market, and another way of doing things in a workplace. Yeah. But it's temporary, and then over time, after a while, you start feeling like a local.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, we're especially with Thailand and Amsterdam somewhat being a different continent, or at least culture, from your home. What were some of the biggest challenges that you faced along the way, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah. Well, if we're talking about, for example, access to money, right, and access to your savings and financial services, when I was in Thailand, and as I said, the war started, and then the sanctions started coming in. And,
did that affect you at all?
Yeah, it actually affected pretty much any Russian with a bank account, with a bank card. At one point, MasterCard and Visa canceled all the cards that were issued by Russian banks. Shit. And I still remember the very last time that I withdrew money at Thai ATM, and then the next day, all my bank cards stopped working. So we had to start really fast, looking into these alternatives, money remittance services, some weird Bitcoin schemes, whatever. And we found some, but also I just think my planning kind of part of the brain I always have this nest egg, this cushion of cash that I bring everywhere with me.
Yeah.
And our rent was paid for, and we had enough money to cover our travels to like Istanbul to the next location. So it was fine for the time being. But of course, when things like this happen, there's a lot of panicking, and there's a lot of companies that take advantage of you. And you really need to be aware of, what you're dealing with. Like a friend of mine was trying to save his savings, save his deposits, and he used like one obscure Swiss financial services company for it, and basically never saw his savings again. So it's stories like that happen all the time when people are in a position of what do I do?
Yeah. Do you have any top tips to protect yourself from that?
Well, as I said, I guess if you're traveling to a new location, if you're trying to settle there, or just like you're gonna spend a considerable amount of time there, bring cash with you. Some cash. It's always good to have some cash in the most like popular currencies as well. So like you bring euros, you bring dollars with you, maybe local currency if you have it, and plan. Like I usually plan for like 3 months at least. That would cover, a laptop that's stolen, medical expenses that could be like
so
unexpected.
You would cover your base needs for any worst case scenario.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because especially in Europe, we're moving away so much from cash, like especially after the COVID-19 pandemic, right? And I think everything you can pay with cash. And sometimes the Germans are made fun of as the cash nation, right, of Central Europe. And we see it as well that Germans want cash, and it's important because sometimes at the bakery you just can't pay with a card because the amount is too little.
Yeah.
But then you're suggesting that especially if you're traveling and if you're not sure what's going to happen, that maybe some cushioning would be, and certainly was helpful for you.
Yeah, exactly. Depends on the country, of course.
Yeah.
So like as you said, Germany is a little bit more leaning towards the cash.
Yeah.
Although it's changing, I do remember those days when I wouldn't be able to get on a subway without a few coins.
Yeah.
And like a larger bill would not work either. So you literally you have to think about how many coins you have in your wallet.
Okay.
Right now it's a little bit different, but like in Thailand, for example, we use cash a lot.
Yeah.
To pay for stuff.
I had the same actually. I paid my rent in Thailand in cash, which to me sounded all the money laundering alarm bells.
Yeah.
But I guess that's a little bit the culture there as well. So what were some of the most memorable and most exciting experiences that maybe you say, I'll never forget that, I don't regret traveling, this made it all worth it, all the challenges?
Yeah. That's a really good question, because there are a lot of things, not one in particular. I feel like the most valuable part of actually being abroad for a longer period of time is the exposure you get to a different culture, to people, even if you don't really leave touristy locations or wherever it is you want to hang out, and like a beach or whatever, you still are exposed to food, to people.
Yeah.
You may be reading up a little bit about the history, culture. So I definitely don't regret living in either countries, and I would love to come back and spend some more time there. Mostly I remember food.
Nice. Would you recommend it also to someone with a young child or young children? Because I think that's just adding a new layer of complexity to it, I guess.
It does a little bit, but definitely I would. Yes, yeah. I would recommend traveling with your kid. It may add a little bit more hassle to stuff, but your kid is probably not gonna, if it's a small kid, he's not probably gonna remember it.
Yes.
But I don't know, when, for example, in Thailand, this is the first time my kid saw the sea and felt sand. And at first he was really afraid of it. He would cry. He wouldn't want to like touch the sand and with his feet and go into the water. But like 2 days passed and he would be impossible to take out of the water. And it's just so much fun to see the surrounding world with the child's eyes, I guess, sometimes. Yeah. What about you?
Oof. A lot of sunsets, to be honest. Right. With different scenery. But I think around Europe, it was all roughly the same or similar culture, I should say. Not so much, though, in Thailand. And I also later on spent some time in the US. And I find it really difficult to put that into words, to be honest, what difference that makes to live in a radically different culture like Thailand is to Central Europe, for example. But it adds a lot of really beautiful experiences. I have a lot of hikes that I did and little motorbike trips that I did with some friends that I just never forget, that are really beautiful. Lots of temples, of course, Thailand. But just, I think it's hard to put into words, but definitely would recommend or would have done it again and will keep traveling. Yeah.
Can you tell me, how did you navigate your kind of like budget, your money when you were in Thailand? Mm-hmm. How did you support yourself? And the same question on when you were on a boat and you were traveling, and obviously like far away from all the usual infrastructure that we have.
Yeah. So with Thailand, I could mostly keep the same infrastructure that I had when I lived in Germany already, which was to debit, to MasterCards, to credit cards. And I had two at two different banks because I wanted to be sure that things don't get messed up. You never know.
One of them goes through.
Yeah, exactly, right? So one was a Master, one was a Visa card. So I was also differentiating a little bit there, but didn't have to worry about that at all because my MasterCard worked everywhere. So that was really nice. Debit card didn't work in Thailand. It did work on the boat though, because Europe.
Yeah.
And then in terms of budgeting, I just made a plan based on that, then said, okay, this is the level of rent, this is the level of boat that you can get. For example, my boat, I think one of the biggest misconceptions that people often have about traveling is how it's vastly expensive because they base it off of a holiday where you go on a 1 week holiday with your family and it costs you 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 euros, whatever it is. But it's, first of all, in Eastern or Southeast Asia, it's a little bit different. Because the pricing level is so different there. But then also when it comes to traveling on a boat, people are like, oh, you have your own yacht. But really 7.5 meters is not what you can call a yacht. But then also the boating prices range from smallest prices to really high prices. But to give you an idea, so my boat cost a lot less than 10,000 euros. And I sold it for roughly the same price after as I bought it before. So if you want, then my only rent price was harbor fees, which was 600, 700 euros, maybe a month. Yep. In the high season in the Mediterranean, that was. So I think it actually can be cheaper than living in a steady home, depending on how you design your lifestyle and how you, like what choices you make, right? You can have, I think in Thailand, I paid 300-400 euros of rent a month, but I had a really nice apartment and it was in a apartment building which had a pool and a gym and like all the stuff you could imagine. That would probably cost you a lot more in Europe. So I think that's really interesting to keep into consideration as well when thinking about planning, think about traveling or planning a travel like that, that potentially it's not as expensive as you think.
Right. And before or during those trips, did you do a lot of research on, on how to navigate your financial situation there, what bank to choose, other services that you can use?
Okay. I did a little bit to a certain degree. Because I wanted to make sure I don't arrive in Thailand and then my MasterCard and Visa card don't work. So I checked that out before. But I generally rather research travel topics, which is why my immediate response was, yes, I did a lot of research. Not so much though on the, hey, will this work here? Will this work there? Because I've had traveled in Europe a little bit before, so I knew, or I was just assuming that my cards would work in France the same way they work in Italy and in Spain and whatever.
Yeah.
So for the banking part, not so much, but for Asia as well. Yeah. One thing that also surprised me a little bit, and I'd love to hear your experience as well, but for me, the visa situation with Thailand was surprisingly easy. I always thought like, oh yeah, you have to get a visa. Mm-hmm. But all it really is applying on a website, then going to the embassy, showing them your passport, they put it in, you pay them 60, 100 euros, whatever it is. And then you actually have your visa and you have the right to travel there.
Yeah. Exactly. It's exactly the same. And I actually also got an extension while we were there. So, and it encompassed one visit to an office to confirm that you are a person, and just get an additional stamp. And you could do that one or two times, I don't remember exactly. And a lot of people that I met there also like enrolled in some language school that gave them a right to live there for a very long time.
Ever.
Yeah, forever.
Yes, I had a few friends who did that as well, who lived in Thailand for 2 years, then I think.
Yeah.
How was that with Europe? Because I think Europe is a lot more bureaucratic than Thailand. Was that especially, because I assume you got a work visa to live in the Netherlands as well, right?
Yeah. I mean, so we were looking into different options. There's of course the official way and the way that we use, the most kind of adopted way of getting a job and somewhere in Europe, and your employer will sponsor a visa, and then based on that you get a residence permit that you can stay while your employment lasts. So this is how we are here right now. But there are also like digital nomad visas. For example, a friend of mine has been looking into Portugal's digital nomad visa. She works for an IT company, like as a not as an employee, but like as a like a freelancer kind of deal. And under that, she can actually apply and live there, and her salary would then pay for more basically in Portugal. The same thing with my friend who works for a British company but lives in Serbia, and his salary in British pounds covers much more in Serbia than it would in Britain.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of things that you can do if you have means to support your income, basically to show that you have stable income from freelance or from your clients or from employment, whatever. You can look into different options.
Yeah, interesting.
For Istanbul, Russians don't need a visa. We can stay 2 months in the country and then renew once again for another month. And a bunch of my friends are still there living like as residents already, because you basically get a residence permit if you rent an apartment for a longer term.
Oh, okay. So that's one way to just be able to live there and potentially then also travel from there. Yeah,
exactly.
I think it's very interesting also with the example that you mentioned before, to have a British salary and live in Serbia, because I think there's a certain level of arbitrage that you can also use in order to fund your travels a little bit, and maybe live well below your means, then easier than you would if you would live in the UK and be constantly on a road trip in the UK, let's say, because that would just naturally be more expensive.
Yeah, I don't think that people think about it that much, but like for digital nomads, it could be a big deal. You already have your home currency, you have currencies that you get paid in, and you transact in yet another coin. And people assume that, well, I will keep my money and spend my money in the currency that I receive it, and that's fine. But you can also figure out a way to adjust, like to basically raise your quality of life if you decide to, okay, well, with this money, I can actually get more if I move to whatever.
Yeah.
So if you're mobile enough, if you are into that kind of lifestyle and nothing is stopping you, like, maybe you have elderly parents or your kid goes to school or whatever, you can easily move and you'll live a better life potentially than you would in your home country.
Yeah.
Not sure how it sounds, but well.
No, I think there's a lot of great experiences out there to have.
Yeah. I feel like it's important to, when you're doing your research before you're moving into a new location, to to find like if we're talking about access to finances, find a bank that would support your lifestyle. Find a bank that would care for you as a user and create conditions for you to be like as location independent as you want to be.
Especially with exchange rates, to be honest, because I've been ripped off a little bit with exchange.
Yeah.
Like, it's so easy because it just looks like a few percentage points here and boom, you lost a couple of €100 with just a single, or dollars, whatever it is, with just a single withdrawal.
Yeah.
So I think that's a couple of things that I would look out for in a bank.
Yeah.
If only we knew a bank that would give you zero effects, right? That would be really cool.
Right. It's like or simply access to the bank, when, for example, when we moved from Istanbul to here, my card was almost immediately blocked, even though I would call customer support and say like, hey guys, I'm moving.
Yeah.
So this is going to happen.
Yeah.
And then the app stopped working at some point.
Okay.
When I switched from the Turkish phone to the Dutch phone, and any changes to your profile info have to be made through visiting a physical branch, which don't exist here.
Yeah.
And I mean, I still have some money there, but I have no way of accessing it.
Okay. Can you when you go back to Turkey? Or?
Well, probably, yeah.
Okay.
They're going to be like, hey, where'd you go?
Plan a holiday and it will pay for itself.
Right.
Thanks everyone for listening. We hope that you gained some valuable insights and we're looking forward to seeing you again next week. In the meantime, ask us some questions in the comments below and make sure to like and subscribe.
See you next week.